Welcome back to Goliath. I'm here today talking to Kate Stewart, the director of Zephyr, one of our favorite folks in the ecosystem because she does so much to help us out, to kind of guide the pathway of the project and to give really good information. Today, we're going to be talking about the Cyber Resilience Act, which is another area that Kate has talked about. So thanks for being here, Kate.
Thank you. And I'll just say it's Cybersecurity Resilience Act, just to make sure we get the acronym
Got it.
correct from
See,
the
already
start.
learning. Right. And this
Okay.
actually is a really good framing because I am here. I am playing the foil. I am the noob. I am the person, looking at the dates as we'll talk about here. I'm the person who's like turning in my homework late and be like, what was the assignment again? So the Cybersecurity Resilience Act, this is something that the European Union has put into place. There are timelines for it. This is something that probably more engineers need to know about or are hearing about it late. And I've heard a little bit of panic, but also just like what do I need to do here? And you've been speaking about this. So where
Yeah.
have you spoken about this before?
So I spoke at Embedded World back in March, and then I've spoken at the Embedded Online Conference on this. And there'll probably be another talk or two because as we keep on learning more information
Exactly.
and keep on
Yeah.
updating things, because there's in the timeline. Well, let's go to the timeline right now, right
Sure.
from the
Let's
start,
do it. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and then you can sort of see what's going on here. So in this timeline,
We're all late for turning in our homework. It seems like, huh?
it seems like
Yeah.
basically the governments have to define some pieces that are missing from this legislation. So the legislation came into force, or they call it entered into force in Europe last year in December. And so the clock started ticking then. And the governments have to put some things in place for all of this to all work. And they have to have that all ready by about a year from now, June of next year, June of 26.
Okay.
But 3 months after that, the manufacturers have to start reporting.
Wow.
And
Okay. Yeah.
so
Right.
we've got these things that we need to get in place, but then all of a sudden, woof, it's going to hit.
Yeah, exactly. Right. 15 months goes pretty fast when these kind of
Goes
things are rolling
fast.
along
And
too.
then, everything has to apply and be done. And so what has to, you have to do it right effectively a year later, at the end of December. That's got to all come into play here. So there'll be time that a lot of these things will get, worked on in processes. So the 15 months, though, is in order to start reporting, you need to get things organized and understand. And so understanding your role in this ecosystem and what perspective you've got and what your obligations are is different. And the reason the manufacturers are paying attention to this is that this little legislation's got teeth, okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Specifically, if you go look at what the manufacturers have to adhere to, if I bring up the section, no, it's they've got here we go, the penalties. Okay, 15 million euros per offense, or 2.5% of total worldwide turnover. This is why they're paying attention.
Right. Right. Well, and also in terms of just how it kind of rolls through the industry too. I always think to when did USB-C start becoming so prevalent? It's like, oh well, actually when the EU started pushing this kind of stuff, and everyone's just like, well, we got to do it for the EU, which is this large market. We're going to do it everywhere, and it's just going to drive this adoption. Because why would you do it multiple ways? It doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And so we've got a lot of pieces that are coming into play here that we need to start figuring out. As manufacturers make money, they're the ones who get the penalties. As open source stewards, we really don't have penalties associated with us. On the other hand, we want manufacturers and companies to use our project.
Of course.
So making sure that we get as good, we make it as seamless as possible is something that we've been focusing on in Zephyr from the security side for a while. And realistically, we've always been trying to adopt the security best practices in Zephyr. And this has really put us in a nice spot for this.
Yeah.
But
how would you define manufacturer specifically? Because I could think about even just people that are involved in Zephyr. There's chip manufacturers, there's board manufacturers, there's device manufacturers. So like where are the lines drawn, or is it just kind of all of the above?
No, it's actually anyone who has a commercial interest is considered a manufacturer. Okay, so
actually Goliath would be then too.
Key is products with digital elements. Okay, which is software and hardware.
Okay,
but realistically, it's for that. Now, there's a lot of other legislation that kicks in that's already there in place for certain types of regulated industries. But this is now a catch-all for anything that doesn't fall under those categories.
Got it. Okay.
And so that's kind of what we're doing. And so, if you start looking at the stakeholders as the Act defines it, we've got open source developers. Realistically, they've tried very hard not to have any penalties on open source developers. and things like, hobbyist projects or anything else. They don't want it. They don't want to impede that ecosystem. Okay.
Yep.
And so they defined a role called open source stewards. And an open source steward is someone that is a legal entity, okay, associated with the project. So Zephyr is going to be an open source steward by their definition. Okay.
Right. And
Because
not to be confused with open source steward, which would be you, right?
well, no, open source steward is the Zephyr project. And as
No,
opposed
sorry,
to
I was just making it
steward, you're
a
putting
joke.
on us.
I'm just putting a joke on your name. Yeah, just that open
Yeah,
source steward would be like, as you're wearing a T-shirt that says open source, right? Yes.
yeah, no, it is what it is.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so the stewards have that sort of gray area between the developers and the manufacturers. But manufacturers, integrators, and distributors are all called out as specific roles in the Act. And they're the ones who all those nasty little penalties are applying to. And then we basically have the concept of these market surveillance and authorities. And so there's the concept of computer security and response team, or CSIRT. And eventually Zephyr's going to have to figure out, we'll get to learn which one we end up reporting to when we see vulnerabilities. And then the European Agency for Cybersecurity, or ENISA, is another one of these surveillance and authorities that has roles in this Act. So these are the players, effectively, that we need to look at.
I believe I've already subscribed to like Zephyr's vulnerability announcements and things like it, right? So it's kind of a natural extension of that.
Yeah. Well, Zephyr had to put these processes in place a while back, right? And so this is the sort of thing that the vulnerability process and the notifications and everything else, we can do it in Zephyr to those who subscribed. But the Act is calling for you to tell your users, but if you don't know who your users are, what you going to do, right? So hopefully we'll see people who have products with Zephyr subscribe so that they get notifications. Otherwise, they're on their own completely to catch up and monitor us passively, I guess, when we actually announce something. But what they've got is they sort of segment things. So this is manufacturers and integrators and distributors sort of fall into more of this type of thing. And then we sort of don't have, because we don't have commercial interest other than our membership and us collecting together to make Zephyr happen. We don't really have that, so that's why we're considered an open source steward, even though we're a legal entity.
I see.
Individuals though are not community. Are you providing? Are you just contributing? If you're just sending a patch in, it's not going to hit you. Anything else? So they're trying to be pretty fair about all this, which is the initial versions didn't have that, and so kudos to the people who were listening to the community when they were going through this work. A lot of this stuff sort of shifted a bit in 24, because we had some initial, some of the slides I'm showing you here were from FOSDEM in 24, at the start of the year. And over the course of the year, they continued to refine and make things a bit more sane for the open source and the storage communities.
That's great. And so in this use case, though, so we were talking about individuals or people, maybe companies that are subscribed to these updates directly from Zephyr, but now there's a secondary path where that's also going to this regulatory body, and then that gets disseminated again from there? Or is that just the reporting is an ongoing thing?
The Zephyr will be reporting in, and so part of what we're waiting for from that government information is understanding which CSIRT we're working with and so forth. Now, this isn't a strange thing for Zephyr, because we've been doing this already with the US. Okay, we have, Zephyr has been a CVE numbering authority pretty much since 2017, 2018, in that range. So we've been doing this and working with a government entity as a project for a long time. So we're just adding another 2 on our notify list, effectively, about vulnerabilities. Now, I'm purely hoping that the EU vulnerability database will federate with the national vulnerability database in the US, so we don't have 2 separate ones people have to track. But that's it. They say outside my pay grade. I'm not active in those circles that are making those decisions.
Right. You do the most you can as the Zephyr representative, and then we move on, and people can do their own.
Move on from there, yeah. And so that's going to how it's going to go. So I've got some, there's, when you actually go into the Act, there are certain pieces called out for the open source stewards. And if you start going through that, you can sort of see pretty clearly that, we're in pretty good shape with Zephyr. If you're curious, I can sort of walk you through some of it a little bit.
I'd be curious actually to kind of talk about, so now someone watching this or watching your previous talks about it, just thinking about, there's the reporting requirements for CRA, right? And that's kind of the Zephyr level. And then there's the, the user level, or not the user, but maybe the developer level of like, listening to government entities, Zephyr as a reporter directly, that sort of thing. But then to take a step further of like what's going to directly impact a developer. So someone who's using a microcontroller, it's running Zephyr, they have all this reporting that's there. Are there additional things that they have to think about to skip that 15 million euro fine? Because I feel like that is the rubber on the road.
The rubber on the road is that, and they're going to need to go and look at the manufacturer section. And one of the things for the manufacturers is they've got, depending on the type of product, there is different strictness in terms of the support obligations as well as the the reporting obligations. So one of the things that's going to be potentially problematic is if you're using it if you're being used, you may have to notify people within 24 hours. Okay.
So that's notifying to your users then? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Basically, so I'm a medical device manufacturer. Yeah. I'm selling to thousands of people. I need to notify them in 24 hours.
They should definitely have to let the CCERT or ENISA know within that period.
Okay.
And then the expectation is they will be able to notify them within 72 hours. They have to provide the general information. So they have to notify the monitoring authority within 24 hours. And then they have to notify some of their customers within 72 that there's an issue. And then they have to, within a couple week period, they have to basically provide remediation. Now, Zephyr as an open source project, we have a slightly different time scale for this type of thing. Mm-hmm. And what we've committed to in the project is when someone lets us know the PCERT, because it's volunteers, will respond within a week. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because and then we'll set up a 90-day embargo window if it's a valid vulnerability. And we try to fix it in the project and upstream, on our tip and everything within 30 days. Sure. And then we keep it under embargo for 60 days more so that manufacturers can deal with their downstream, their users, right?
Of course.
And you can sort of see that is a slightly different time scale than the Act is calling for.
It is, yeah. And in that example, that's someone who might be a security researcher that has found a vulnerability, doing responsible disclosure to the Zephyr project, and then actions happening as a result of that. You're saying?
Yeah, and we would do it, but they could be doing it directly to ENISA, like to the
sure.
to the the CCERT, and then hopefully the CCERT will notify us, which sometimes happens with the US one. Okay, sometimes we learn about it because it's a common component that everyone's using, it gets notified, and then they say, oh, hey, and then push it down to us. That all makes it, work. And then if we get something wrong, those authorities are the ones that basically come back to us and say, hey, does this make sense? And we'll fix it. We've done that before too. So these are the sorts of things that get called for. Okay. What's interesting though, is like the Linux Foundation at the start of the year did a survey of manufacturers. And there's this free survey out there. Then the link is here. And how aware, and the punchline, the title up here is unaware and uncertain about CRA readiness. So you're not the only one who hasn't done their homework yet. Okay.
Oh, thank goodness.
There you go.
Right.
But some of the stats that came out of that is awareness is low, and so as you're seeing, it's rising now pretty quickly this year. Mm-hmm. And the timelines people weren't aware of, and people aren't sure about the complexity. And this is the worry one really for me, which is half the manufacturers just passively rely on upstream for the fixes. They just pull it down when they get the next release and things like that. Right. And if you've got so what they do is they actually classify products into buckets. Okay, important class 1 and 2, and then what is it? The ones that are sort of severe, like critical. They have
like a heart rate monitor, or like a pacemaker, or something like that. Yeah,
or things dealing with money or energy infrastructure. Yes. That type of stuff, right?
Yes.
And for those, the requirements are even higher, and the auditing, they have to be audited to a certain extent because of the regulatory aspect. And so those are the ones that, when they're passively relying on open source, because open source is pretty much everywhere, getting that information and getting it accurate is going to be I think that's where they'll probably end up figuring out a better way of working with communities, and they may adjust some of what they're asking for, but I can't tell at this point in time. All I can do is look at the Act and say, yeah, we've got a slight impedance mismatch here.
Right. It is interesting to think as well about like how this might actually change the relationship of manufacturers to the project, and then then again as a user choosing Zephyr over something that might be. So if I went to just like a super small, again maybe open source RTOS or something like it, like the scale actually benefits us now. Whereas Zephyr's big. There's a lot of people involved, right? But whereas someone might have said before, oh, I'll use this tiny little RTOS or write my own RTOS, then everything's on you. Everything's on that small.
Everything's on the person, and they have control
Yeah.
over it. And okay, that is definitely a strategy that some go down. On the other hand, when you're starting to deal with a lot of communication stacks, IoT, a lot of,
Exactly.
we're
Yeah.
plugging into modern infrastructure and then monitoring things at scale, and a
Yeah.
lot of things that you guys are involved with in terms of
Of
helping
course.
customers with
Yeah.
that stuff. That's kind of where you need these pieces to sort of all fill together
Yeah.
to make it possible to do this. The Zephyr project did, specifically because of some of this stuff coming down, changed our support window, for instance.
Hmm.
So the CRA is asking for, you must be supporting for the defined life of your product, and sort of 5 years is sort of expected type of deal, unless it's something like a car, in which case it's 30 or 15 or 20 or
Okay.
whatever.
Yeah.
Energy infrastructure is, for instance, is usually 30 or things like that.
Got it. Yeah. Yep.
But being able to support your products as they evolve over time is going to be an interesting challenge, and you're expected to in this act, because they want things to be a little bit more defined, so that the consumers have a little bit more, they can have reasonable expectations that things will stay supported, and so as opposed to the throwaway economy.
Right.
And
Yep.
so that's going to get, these are all factors here, right? And they're just trying to do the right thing. At the end of the day, they're trying to make it easier for the consumers to have a more, a better experience with cybersecurity on their devices.
Yeah.
And their products with digital elements, as they say.
Right.
So
Right.
that's
Yeah.
what's going on.
Fewer fish tanks that are doing denial of service attacks and similar apocryphal stories about IoT type things.
Yeah.
This somewhat squishy legislation at the beginning, right? It was
Mhm.
just firming up, like you said. It is for good reason, right? It's
Yeah,
infrastructure security, it's money security, it's even consumer security.
it's consumer, yeah. And the thing is, if you actually start looking at all the clauses in the CRA and actually read through the act, it's actually lining up with the other standards that are out there. So it's not like it's come out of nothing, okay? And so
Yeah.
there's this one report here that actually goes through, does a crosswalk across all these standards with all the clauses from the CRA, and says, see, here, it's from this one. This one's calling for it. This is satisfying it,
I see.
And
Yeah.
so it lines up with things that are sort of standard pack policies already. But it's just basically pulling it together and then putting some teeth with those fines, so that
I
people are
see.
paying attention to it, as opposed to it just being sort of an optional, well, I'll do the good thing. So those who've been doing the good thing already are in a nice position. Those who've been, oh, it's a cost, I don't want to deal with it, I don't want to deal with it.
Right.
They're the ones they're the ones that the legislation is targeted to make, say, okay, come on, guys, pay attention, care about your consumers.
Yeah. Yeah. It will be interesting as the first kind of fines go through the system to see, like, that's when the true like ripple effect.
Much like GDPR, we've all seen
Right. Exactly.
GDPR
Yes.
come into
Yeah. Yeah.
effect, all right? And
Yeah.
so that they've done this sort of strategy before. It seems to work, at least
Mhm.
and so now these things are they're basically applying it to security and trying to make it better for the consumer of various
Yeah.
elements.
The thing that jumped out to me from my putting my Goliath hat on is the
Mhm.
address through security updates, right? So there's the kind of the Zephyr updates, but then the Goliath offers over the air updates.
Right.
Is there any kind of definition there, or is it just like you got to get it to your devices?
Um, I think it'll probably end up falling into the disclosure update portion, and I have not studied that portion of the act. And so I would I'd pull up the act. It's all open there, public, and there's English translations, so we're good.
Got it.
And I would just basically start looking for updates. But I think there are some expectations around update policy and
Yeah.
the timelines for updates.
Okay.
And the more things are automated and the more things can be tested and automated upfront, I think the more confidence we'll have on doing those updates. There are certain places in the IoT space where it is impossible to update, but then you have to notify your customers that there is an issue, and what the mitigation is, be it throw away the device or whatever, I don't know.
Right.
But hopefully we can get the updates happening and then things managing at scale. And so having the ability to do over the air updates, especially with a whole fleet of things that are monitoring, is going to be really key.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I feel like I think I read one other place prior to this, just like intrusion detection, that sort of thing as well. So if something is, watching someone else's data, that you have to report it because someone was in the system, and much like you have. Like every
Mm-hmm.
week I get these my data breach type notices, but hopefully not on the IoT front as much. But if it happens, then you have to report.
Then you have to report it, and then you have to basically say what mitigations you're putting in place, and
Mhm.
it has to be considered reasonable by the courts, etc. So
Yeah.
we've got these lovely little challenges here to deal with. And so having, doing the best practices on the security side. One of the other things that they're doing is they are explicitly asking for an SBOM, which
I was wondering
really,
if that. I know that is
yeah,
a thing you've talked about many times in the past, but that's
yeah,
software bill of materials, right?
right. So now they haven't defined which fields they consider to be their SBOM. So I know the Germans are looking at a slightly different set than the US government's been looking at as a minimum set of elements. What we've got in Zephyr should be able to support anything they ask for. And we'll just have to, if we have to tweak it a little bit to add a few more fields, we can in our gen. But right now, we're waiting to see what are the Germans asking for, and then what can we generate automatically and make that easier for people who are using Zephyr to be able to say, okay, here's my SBOMs. In fact, right now today, if you actually go literally, these 3 lines are all you need to do to generate an SBOM with Zephyr.
Wow.
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can, in fact, you get 3 SBOMs. You get an SBOM of the sources with the licensing information, an SBOM of the app sources with their licensing information, and then you get a build SBOM, which also links to some of the modules, but also says exactly which source files have made it into your build image. So which which .os are going to .as, which .as are going to your ELP image. You are very precisely saying that, which means you get rid of a whole class of false positives from the security side, vulnerability side. So you really want that level of precision in order to be able to not have to do an update when you don't need to. So if you hear that there's a vulnerability about USB and Zephyr or something like that, or Bluetooth Low Energy and Zephyr, and where the vulnerability is, if that file isn't in the image you're shipping, you don't have to update.
Right.
You really want
K-config was off for that one. I'm good.
Right? So that precision, rather than just relying on the version number of Zephyr and the point versions and so forth, that's going to let you say, no, we don't have to update it. I'm proving it to you here. This is why you don't have to update. Because if you have this detailed transparency, you can be much more effective in your management remotely. Yeah. And so this is one of the things that I'm hoping that the industry will wake up to, the fact that we need to have our SBOMs down to, like I say, they're just asking pretty much the component level at this point. And when you're working with the Java ecosystem, okay, fine. Each component is only 2 or 3 lines, whatever. But when you're working with the C and the embedded side, you really want to know, is that file really there or not? Right. And
right. The 2 or 3 gigs of Zephyr stuff in the without the allow list turned on. I don't build everything in there. I use my vendor specific files. I don't use every HAL, every library that's in there.
Right. You just use what you need in Zephyr and make what you need. And the thing is, and then being able to have those SBOMs to say, okay, this is what was made into that image that we shipped out here. Oh, we've got a vulnerability coming in. Let me go check. Oh, no, those files aren't in that image. And you can tell the person explicitly, you're not affected. And here's why.
Yeah.
And being able to do that means you don't have to do an over-the-air update. And you're good. And then less churn and less management. And
do you know if there's any reporting requirements around something like this where you can register for a build? So like I'm releasing 1.1.2 version on Goliath, it's sending out that down to everybody. I could put the SBOM or something similar. I can register with the government entity or similar and say, this is what's in here.
Yeah. Well, for instance, the FDA is already needing it. So if you're doing anything that has a medical device, the FDA wants to know all the details in the SBOM at the lowest level you can take it to, potentially also as well with the hardware and A services that you rely on.
Got it.
And
that's like a verification and validation type of documentation there as well.
Yeah, and like I say, the nice thing about the SBOMs we've got here is every image, like every file, is hashed. So if you've got a built image, it's hashed, but also realistically, every source file you've been using has a hash. So if something's tampered or shifted, you can always, 5 years later, you can go back and verify against, have these files changed that you're using, so that you can reproduce things. And so this is, this will be eventually the power for it all.
That's great. That actually really reinforces how I love using West manifests in order to call out specific versions, even at specific hashes within a repo, some things like that. Because, like you said, 5 years later, I want to be able to come back. I want to see a controlled version in Git in my example, but like you said, in the build version as well. I wanted to be able to call that out, call it back to the version of Zephyr that I was building with at the time.
And quite frankly, each of the individual source files that you were using at the time, and make sure that they are still nothing has shifted out from under you, which is what we're trying to avoid. And, one of the things Zephyr is doing for people doing products with Zephyr, even if they're not members, although we would love them to be members because that helps support the product and our infrastructure, is, if they have a product and they can give us the details so that we know there's a product and they can tell us which version or something, they can sign up to be notified by us. So we will push out these notifications to product owners if they've let us know about them. But because it's open source, they don't need to let us know. And so at that point in time, they're on their own.
Right. You can't save everybody from themselves, right?
Well, yeah, and like I say, because it's open source, we don't have contracts with them, we don't have support agreements with them, things like that, and they're using it and they're finding it effective, all good. But
Right.
if they want to see some of the vulnerability stuff and they don't want to be a member, they do need to give us enough details to let us know they really are using Zephyr in a true product, because we don't want bad actors here either.
Got it.
So that's
And then
the other thing.
to put it on the user side again. So Zephyr, fine, secure, everything's good. I'm doing maybe a custom module in Zephyr that I discover that it alerted something, it has something on some kind of vulnerability that has been reported to me. So then
Yeah.
I'm responsible to report it to the regulatory body and my users, but I don't need to push that upstream because that module is just for my product. Is that right?
Well,
Kind of the
it's your own module, and it's not public or anything else. Like, you're not getting it from somewhere else.
Mhm.
You created it yourself. Yeah, you just need to let your customers and the regulatory
Okay.
authorities know about the issue,
Got it.
because it doesn't impact things. If you are using a module in Zephyr, like from another party,
Okay.
like I'm thinking of the trusted firmware or something like that,
Right.
if we find there's an issue, we're going to need to let them know. And we'll probably also, quite frankly, say, hey, we see an issue here to the authorities, but we have to let the upstream know as well. And
Yeah.
then they need to let whoever else they need to know. But they have to put
Right.
processes in place to do that. And a lot of open source projects really don't have processes for this yet.
Got it.
And so that's going to be the interesting part. I think things like trusted firmware and some of the other variants of the boot stories and so forth will eventually have them. They're going to need them. But I think over the update stuff, all this stuff is going to need it when we're using. But the question is, are the communities big enough to be able to band together to do it? And it's going to be, I think, eventually one of those sort of health metrics that people will look at when they're deciding to use an open source project or not. Is does it have these pieces of infrastructure
Right.
available to let people work with things like the CRA efficiently?
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine just from Goliath's example, right? So you mentioned OTA. We have our own OTA library, but that's built on top of like MCU boot, the libco app, and what's the last thing? I guess the underlying elements of Zephyr as an RTOS, right? Really threads. And yeah, I mean, if any of those three go, we should push that up to Zephyr so that you can kind of push it back down to Zephyr.
And so we can let others who might be having that, but you also need to potentially let the MCU boot people know.
Right,
for instance, and make sure that they're reacting appropriately, as well as obviously letting your customers know. But at least you have a line of sight onto your customers.
Right. Yep.
The projects don't, like MCU boot and Zephyr and things like that.
Yeah.
So these
Well,
are the challenges.
As more people kind of become more aware, as that 60 some number goes down, that'll be easier to kind of get some attention around it, I'm sure.
Yeah. There is a white paper that came out in March about pathways for best practices. And they use Zephyr as one of the case studies in there. So there's a lot about Zephyr. And the other ones that were there were the Civil Infrastructure Project, which has to support infrastructure for 30 years. So they've been thinking about some of these issues too. And then Yocto has been thinking about a lot of these issues as well.
Right.
So there's some examples out there. The other thing that the Linux Foundation is providing that's useful is there's a free course. So if you wanted to learn more about this, it's a free course. It's about 90 minutes, and you can just click on it and roll on and then walk and go through it. And that'll give you a lot of the stuff I've been talking about in more detail, especially from the manufacturer side and things like that.
Great. Do you see any changes kind of on the Zephyr roadmap generally as well to fit additional things? Like looking through some of the things that I've seen, again, on the manufacturer side of what's been needed there, a lot of it's actually there. So things like secure boot, there, signed firmware, there, right? TLS, there, DTLS in our case. But do you see any like kind of product level RTOS ecosystem style changes that are required to make it easier, to make it more capable?
No, we'll obviously have to adapt our SBOM generation to whatever the EU finds as an SBOM. Okay, so that will be one of the things that'll be on a roadmap. And in terms of features, I think you'll see probably some more features coming, but it'll be, it'll be contribution based on who needs to do what for their customers. And sometimes they make those visible in advance, and sometimes we just learn about them when the release comes out, or like a couple months before. But I think we've got, like I say, the security team's best practices that we've been following has put us in a pretty good place for dealing with a lot of the issues. We don't really have to do too much that's radically different, I think, at this point. The only thing I'm worrying about is literally the differences in the reporting scale timelines between manufacturers and stewards. And, how can we smooth that a little bit more for the manufacturers would be my question. But I think this is the things we'll be talking a little bit about probably at the TSC face-to-face in Amsterdam.
Yep.
Yeah, the Amsterdam one. So I think some of these topics will be handled there. And like I say, in the sort of virtual get-together, it was sort of agreed by the TSC to take to the 5 years. And so that was one of the things that was changed this year already to make it a little bit more possible to support these things. Let's see if I've got that picture. Yeah, here. So like I say, we used to have a 2-year, and now we still have the same type of 2-year, but then we just do vulnerability things a little bit longer. What's going to be interesting is this potentially opens a business opportunity for people to support things beyond the 5-year period. Yes. And figuring out the strategies for that, and then being able to charge for it, I think is completely reasonable to people who have products out there.
Right. Yeah, because backporting is no small thing, right? That's a huge thing in the Linux world, I believe, as well, right? To offer longer, if you go outside of Ubuntu's 5-year LTS, there are people that do that, and
and then
someone's got to maintain it,
and so forth. And I think that's a perfectly viable way of supporting that longer term of activity. And so that's kind of, this is what we've changed in the project this year in March, just to make sure we could support at least getting us up to that point level. So I think we're, but there may be more things that we learn over this next year or so that we'll adjust and adapt to. But I think we've got a reasonable starting point anyhow.
Yes. One thing that I did some asking around internally, because like I said, I'm new to this stuff, and really just, I'm a hardware designer, and I do more firmware now thanks to Zephyr, and that's been great. But I'm like, what about secure boot, right? And so that's one of the big things. There's a lot of language about that, and signed firmware images and stuff like that. And I told my teammates, I'm like, I've never done that before. Like, what does Goliath need to do for that? And to quote our firmware lead, Goliath delivers a bag of bits. How you interpret and check those in and out of your firmware image, and actually verify them, that's actually up to the user. And that's one where, again, I use things like an ATEC 608, right? The microchip parts, things like it, some, and they have a library for that. But is there any thoughts around just kind of the ease of use and that piece in the ecosystem?
So there's a lot of work going on about doing attestation and signed attestations. And there are free signing services there, so you can effectively sign your images and put a cryptographic hash or some other integrity method on it, and then have the conveyance of the integrity method with your customers, so that they know that they are getting what you have created and it hasn't been intercepted along the way. The thing is, this isn't anything new.
It's almost like we're kind of preceding for I think about forensic accountants, but now forensic firmware for cybersecurity type of applications, so that you have an audit trail,
Yep, we're basically setting it up so that people can audit and understand what they've shipped, and quite frankly, remove all of the, oh, I've got this page that we've got a problem. Oh, I've got to stay up. I want to be able to go type in my database and go, okay, this are affected, and right? You do not want to have to sit there and wade through email messages and spreadsheets and build logs and everything else.
There's only 24 hours that you have, right? There's literally a ticking clock.
Automated. Yeah, we need to get all this stuff automated, and so we need this, this type of metadata there and in an automated fashion so that it's all ready to go. Yeah. And we've got a lot of the pieces are there, at least on the SPDX ecosystem, to start working in there. We're just waiting for tooling to start emerging a bit more, and then we should be able to show some of that off too.
It is interesting, just the scope of engineers I've talked to, like myself. Let's just use myself as a very unsophisticated firmware engineer, builder, that sort of thing.
Very sophisticated, actually, but anyhow.
Thank you very much. But just thinking about myself, my past self, just oh, CI, what is that, right? That kind of thing of so if people are hearing these terms right now for the first time, there is obviously there's a whole system, there's a whole all of the software world wants to teach you about CI, and then thinking about all of this automation and how it can prevent you from security issues, from fines in this case, but just then make your life better and work better with Zephyr too. It's just kind of all fits together, right? It's like all of these things that are skills that are foundational that are going to actually save your business, your product, your customers, that sort of thing too.
Yeah. So, sometimes it's a learning curve. On the other
Yes.
hand, once you figure it out,
Yes.
hopefully you can sort of just make it systemic.
Yes,
and
I agree.
this happens. The ideal is it just happens in the background, and then when you need to query it, you've got it.
Exactly.
And so
Yes,
if we
that
can
is
get
the
to
best
that
case.
stage, we will have quote unquote succeeded.
I agree. So if someone is hearing, I don't know what CI is, I don't know what CRA is, right? And if we could just end how we began, just to remind people about dates and thinking about this sort of thing. So this started in December 2024. Was it 2027 is when it truly goes into effect?
Yeah, that's it. So the entire regulation fully applies in 2027, but manufacturers are going to need to start reporting. And I don't think there'll be the penalties will be there, but the expectation of reporting is so they can train up, quite frankly.
Yep.
And they'll have a year and a quarter or so to train up.
Right. And I did read one other place that anyone with a CE mark is expected, right? Anyone with a CE mark on their product also needs to know this stuff now, which is not a small amount of things.
No, that is not small, and that's with digital elements, right? So, and
Yeah, right.
and the other thing too that's very clear in the legislation is open source stewards should not be putting CE marks on anything.
Oh, interesting.
It really is the people doing the manufacturing integration, and so forth, that are the ones that have to adhere to the CE mark regulations and line it up with that. So yeah, the CE mark is definitely an issue for the manufacturing side.
Okay. Well, if people listening, watching are manufacturers, that's an additional piece of homework, not just thinking about December 2027, but we'll keep making more videos about it here. Thank you, Kate, for being here. This has been, again, as a beginner, I've learned so much already, and I really appreciate your time here.
Great. Well, thank you for the interest, and happy to help get this information shared out so that we can, all get this stuff working properly and not have surprises next year.
Yeah, thanks so much.